Greetings and thanks for tuning in. I'm Don Taylor from Main Street Middle School in Montpelier, and welcome to our 10th and last episode of the PLP Pathways television show. I'd like to thank Orca Media for letting us film the show in their studio, and I'm joined by Maura Kelly.
Hi, I'm Maura Kelly. I teach humanities at People's Academy Middle Level in Morrisville, Vermont. Before we get into today's show, we want to make sure you know how to stay connected with PLP Pathways. You can visit our site, follow us on Twitter, and keep tabs on the project through our blog. We'll show you these again at the end of the show.
And we'd also like to remind you that it's not too late to sign up for the Middle Grades Institute, which is happening June 26th through June 30th at Champlain College. And if you Google Middle Grades Institute, you can find the registration information online. It's a great professional development opportunity. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today in terms of the Act 77 and our work with PLPs and proficiency-based learning and flexible pathways and all the things that have made up our discussions about PLP pathways, we're going to talk today about how educators and teachers and maybe even administrators are thinking about evaluating those systems. The question really is, how do we know if our programs are working, and how are we evaluating them to make changes to help support students and families moving forward? So Maura, just posing that question to you, how are you evaluating your programs, and are you using any specific tools, or is this something that you've even thought about prior to this year?
I think one of the things that we've really thought about our implementation in sort of a 3-year cycle, and this is our first year of sort of a new action plan, and so this has sort of been the implementation year, and we haven't really had time to stop and do a formal sort of assessment and reflection on our system and how it's working school-wide. And so in thinking about that, I think it's a really important step, especially at the end of a school year, leading up to changes that we can implement for next year to strengthen programming and make sure that we really are achieving Act 77. I don't know of a tool, but I think it's something that I would really like to see, because I think it could help some informed decision making happen.
Right. There's a lot of categories too, as I'm listening to you and I'm thinking to myself, the big one for us has been getting student feedback on a regular basis. So we typically send our kids an exit survey after every trimester, and we usually include some element of the PLP or personalized learning in those questionnaires. And I would suggest to teachers out there that if you're not doing that already, and I'm sure a lot of you are, is to just formalize your data collection and feedback collection from students, particularly around any personalized learning activities. But as you mentioned, this tool, and I'm thinking to myself, what would the questions be that we would be asking, and what would ensure that we're implementing Act 77 in an effective way? And I guess the first thing that comes to my mind is, are we reaching out to families and explaining to families proficiencies, proficiency-based learning, if schools out there are transitioning from a Carnegie-based assessment program to the proficiency-based assessment, how are you communicating that to families? That would be one. Obviously another one would be, how are PLPs being integrated into the school community? And then also just asking, if you look at the AOE, the Agency of Education Vermont, their checklist for PLPs, whatever you're using or whatever your platform, are you meeting those criteria? And so really what we're talking about is the development of some sort of evaluatory tool. And I guess Danielson's framework for good teaching comes to mind. What's going to be the framework? And as we move forward, it's important to think about, what do I want to evaluate, or what do I want to be assessed on in terms of how our program is working? And are there particular elements of personalized learning or PLPs that you think you would want to really dial in or know about in terms of evaluation?
I think I would really want to focus on student-directed learning and thinking about within a student's school day, kind of thinking at the teacher level, within a student's school day, where are students acting and as directors and directing their own learning, and are they identifying those spaces as areas where they truly are directing their learning? Are they feeling empowered by those times?
Right.
So it's kind of looking at it from both sides. So evaluating the system, do we have those spaces? And then in talking and interviewing students, are they also identifying that as a time that they're truly directing their learning? Because I think when they get to make those choices about their own learning, that's when the goal setting and reflection within the school day and beyond the school day really can take root, because they're finding their passion in those moments.
And it's interesting too, listening to you talk about that student-directed learning. And I might be interested in maybe looking at goals and how kids are reflecting. And as I'm thinking to myself, wow, I want to evaluate this element or that element, I would also be encouraging teachers to incorporate this into their planning, right? So as you're talking about student-directed learning, and I'm thinking, wow, that's a great idea. Student empowerment, also reflection, and student-negotiated curriculum. And these are all parts of our program, but it's important to kind of identify those elements that you want to assess and then move forward with your plans so that you'll be able to assess and find out how you're doing. So as teachers, I know we're getting to the end of the school year here, but a lot of people are planning their professional development and thinking about changes they're going to make in their program or the tweaks they're going to make to create a more effective learning community. And perhaps you can think about those elements of Act 77 that you would be willing to evaluate, and then planning how you're going to implement them, planning how you're going to collect feedback on them, and then planning how you're going to assess that. Because in our conversations with folks about Act 77, we haven't heard too much about evaluating our programs, and that's part of the reflective decision making as a teacher to make sure that what we're doing is good for students and good for families. Is there anything else you'd like to add about that evaluation or the transition to the end of the year, or how you're using PLPs at the end of the year?
I think just really thinking about taking the time, we ask students to be really reflective at the end of the year and setting some goals, but I also think it's important for teachers thinking forward to the next school year. That's the moment where reflecting on what went well, taking some time maybe to do some writing or journaling about how the PLP went. What would be your hopes if you could dream big or vision something different? What would you do? And grabbing the students while you can, while they're still there, and maybe seeing if you can share some of, encourage them to help with the feedback is helpful too.
Now, not to surprise you with this question, but if we're going to be reflecting, and this is our last episode, what do you think is your biggest takeaway from being involved in PLP pathways and this sort of professional learning? Thinking back, this is now our second year. What would you say are some of your takeaways from being involved in this program?
One of my biggest takeaways would just be the importance of collaborating with teachers outside of sort of your school. I think it's really important that we collaborate within our schools, but the ideas that I've gathered and shared and the resources and just the conversations, it's so important, and it's pushed my practice forward so much. And I think, it's allowed me to both reflect on my current practice, but then also hear about different practices and be encouraged and inspired by what others are doing in their classroom. And I've always walked away with something that's improved the PLP for my students. And so I think, it's had a huge impact on my classroom.
I would agree. I think that this opportunity has allowed me to collaborate with folks that I wouldn't normally collaborate with. It's also allowed me to meet a lot of educators across the state who are doing amazing things. And what it's also really done is help me fill in my mental framework about Act 77 and how it can look in classrooms. And I think that's really important. So instead of an initiative that seems to be brought into my classroom and not understanding the background, through this collaboration, I understand the background, I understand more about the purpose. I also understand more of the players who are heavily involved and who are doing great things for students. I would also say that being involved in the PLP pathways makes you realize the importance of communication. It makes me think about leadership a lot. It also makes me think about how teachers are doing with initiatives and how difficult it is to really create change and how consistent and focused folks have to be. So rather than going from one initiative to another initiative, if you can focus on a few things that you know are going to make your practice better. I think that's really important to do that and get that focus so that you can really make your classroom a better place. So this has been our second season. I want to thank very much the Middle Grades Institute for supporting us, also the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education. Adam Blair is our videographer, and Orca Media. We really appreciate those community connections, and hopefully we'll see you next year.
Yeah.
Right? Thanks very much, and enjoy your summers.